everybody. I'm going to show you today how to do little shell clusters of double crochet, and I'm using worsted weight yarn and a 4mm hook, and I am using American terms. So to start off this project, you're going to make a slip knot like that, and you're going to chain multiples of 6. So depending on what you're making, if it's a blanket, you're going to make a lot of multiples of 6, or a little purse. So for this project, I'm just going to show you how to do the actual stitch. And so I'm going to do 36 chains. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 33, 34, 35, and 36. And so I have made 36 chains. Now for the very first row, you need to do an extra 2 chains. Okay, and you're going to skip those 2 chains, and into the 3rd chain along, put 5 double crochet all into the same stitch. 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, and then skip 2 chain, and into the 3rd one along, do a slip stitch. Okay, and you have made your first shell cluster of 5. Now, skip 2 chain, and into the 3rd chain along, you are going to put 5 double crochet for your second cluster. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And again, skip 2 stitches and slip stitch into the 3rd one along. And already you can start seeing it taking shape. Okay, so that's 2. So again, I'll show you one more time. Skip 2 chain, and into the 3rd chain along, do 5 double crochet all into the same stitch. Whoops, slipped. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and again skip 2 stitches and slip stitch into the next stitch. You have 3 done. Now you're going to continue this pattern right to the end, where I will meet you at the end. So I've just come to my last cluster, and I've 1 more double crochet to do, and you should have 2 stitches left, and slip stitch into the last stitch at the end of your chain. Okay, and this is what your first row will look like. So they're like little shells of double crochet. Now for row 2, the edges are quite tricky. So what you're going to be doing for row 2 is you're going to be doing a little cluster in between each cluster. Okay, and I'll show you what I mean as I go along. So for row number 2, turn your work and chain 3. That's going to count as a double crochet, and you're doing half a cluster. And the very first stitch at the beginning of this row, you're going to do 2 double crochet. So it might be a little tricky. 1 and 2. Now those 2 double crochet and that chain 3 at the beginning of this row counts as half a shell. And into the top of this shell of the previous row, you're going to slip stitch into the middle double crochet, the one at the very top, like that. Okay, and into the middle of these 2 shells, so this little stitch here, you're going to do 5 double crochet. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then slip stitch to the middle double crochet of the next cluster of the previous row. So you now have 2 clusters here in the previous row, half a one at the beginning and a full one in between these 2. And so you're going to continue this pattern. So into the middle of these two shells, cluster shells, do 5 double crochet. 1, 2. Basically you're doing 5 double crochet on top of the slip stitch of the previous round. That's 4 and 1 more. And then you're slip stitching into the middle double crochet of the cluster. Okay, and one more time. There's the slip stitch of the previous round. You're going to do 5 double crochet on top of that. 1, all into the same space, of course. 3, 4, and 5. And again, slip stitch to the middle double crochet of the cluster, and just continue that right on until we come to here, and then I'm going to show you how to do the half cluster at the end. Okay, so I've come to the second last cluster, the last full cluster, and so into there, to the middle of the two previous, I'm going to do 5 double crochet. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And again, slip stitch to the top of the cluster of the previous round. Now you've come to the end of this row, and you don't want to do a full cluster, you want to do half a cluster to make the line straight. So into this very, very bottom stitch, you're going to do just 2 double crochet. 1 and 2, and that is that row complete. And then turn your work for row 3. So it will start to look like this. So you now have your second row of shell clusters, and now we're going to do our third row of clusters. These 2 stitches here is half a cluster, and obviously these 5 are full cluster, and you're going to be working into the slip stitch in the middle of those. So for row 3, skip the first 2 stitches, and into that slip stitch of the previous row, 5 double crochet. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then slip stitch to the middle stitch of this cluster here, middle double crochet to the top of it. And then into the middle of these 2 clusters of the previous row, you're going to do 5 double crochet. 1, 2, into the slip stitch. 3, 4, and 5. Slip stitch again to the top. And continue this pattern. And you'll start to see it taking shape. Okay, so I am again in the middle of 2 shells, and I want to put a shell on this row, so I'm going to do 5 double crochet. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and slip stitch to the top of the shell of the previous row, and just continue right over, and I will meet you back when I've slip stitched to the second last shell of this row. So I've slip stitched to the second last shell of the previous row. I'm going to do my last shell cluster on this row, which is row 3. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And you're going to slip stitch to the very last stitch, which would be the middle stitch of the cluster. Only this one on the previous round is half a cluster. Okay, and that is your third row done. And as you can see now, it's starting to, you can see the pattern of shells. So for the next row, turn your work, and you're going to repeat the second row. So you're going to repeat rows 2 and 3 over and over again. So just to start this one off, chain 3 as your first double crochet, and into that same space, do 2 more double crochets for half a cluster, and slip stitch to the top of the shell of the previous round, and into the middle of these 2 shells of the previous round, 5 double crochets in on top of the slip stitch. 3, 4 and 5, and slip stitch to the middle. And basically you continue this pattern, and as you go up your side should stay straight. So just repeat row 2 and 3 over and over for how big you want your pattern, and that is how you make 5 double crochet cluster shells. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.